Arboria.
Baik.
Pak Arya, selamat sore Pak
How are you
Arya.
doing?
Hi Scott,
Pasti
nice to see you finally. Sunset from Melbourne.
sudah lama tidak ketemu, sudah 4 tahun sejak makan malam di Amsterdam ya.
Ya, harus makan lagi kita.
Oke, lagi masih di Amsterdam sekarang ya.
Iya.
Oke.
Halo Pak Scott.
Bu Nadia.
Hello, Scott. Are you still in Aussie?
Halo.
Hai Pak Adit, ya still in Aussie, dilarang keluar negeri. Pemerintah melarang warga negaranya keluar negeri.
Pak Adit, my deep condolence, Pak Adit.
Oh yeah, thank you lots, Mas Arya.
Oh, Pak Adit, siapa yang meninggal?
My mother yesterday.
Oh,
very sorry. Very
Very
sorry, Pak Adit. Very sorry.
Hi, Punto. Good morning from Amsterdam, Punto.
Waar wijs je nu op?
Nee, zij moet eerst afmaken met hun.
Ja.
En dan zij moet jou een presentatie. Can you make Obbe a presenter, please?
Hello.
Hello.
Could you make Obbe a presenter, please, so he can present? Oh, ze wachten voor mensen, denk ik.
Op mensen nog.
Ja.
Dat is zo.
Dus je blijft het.
Blijf je even zitten.
Ja.
Doe maar even een koffie bij of zo. Of een glas wijn.
Nee, niks. Ik zit hier. Om te wachten.
Dit is een krukje.
Nee, ik zit op de grond.
Dat is goed.
Maria, ada korpasnya nggak?
Enggak.
Itu sama di korpasnya.
Apa perlu saya telepon?
Ja, dat zou kunnen.
Opa
Hallo, Hasti. Hallo.
Hi.
Ik heb hier two streams here. That makes it a bit complicated, the communication. But I'm doing my best. Okay.
Okay.
Oke, Umu, can you start?
Is het hier? En dan doe je die.
Dan zie je iedereen.
Ja.
Maar je moet hun vragen als...
Should I share the screen or should I just stop sharing the PPT, PowerPoint?
Can you make Obbe a presenter, please?
Yes, you can share
the
the screen.
Can you give me a presenter, please?
De verbinding is niet goed.
Wat zegt hij?
Wacht even, zijn er toelen, chats? Oké. Vragen als je het niet... Oké, dus het eerst een introductie. Oké, ik blijf het...
Starts. We are waiting for people. Yeah, huh?
Yeah, we can start.
Yes, Umu, you can start.
Okay, we're starting now. Okay, hello everyone. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone who has signed in for today. I'm Umu from PDA. And here's a very warm welcome to our 49th Obrolan Heritage Talk, the third one for this year, in year 2021. Heritage Talk is hosted by Documentation Center of Architecture, PDA, in collaboration with Indonesian Institute of Architects, IAI, and facilitated by Trisakti University. So before we get into the discussion, let's have some warm greetings from Bu Hasti Tarekat from Beranda Warisan Sumatera. Bu Hasti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Umu, and good morning, everyone from Amsterdam. My name is Hasti Tarekat. I'm a co-founder of Sumatra Heritage Trust, but I also work as an advisor for cooperations between Indonesia and the Netherlands in cultural heritage, and mostly about shared heritage between Indonesia and the Netherlands. And about Obbe Norbruis, I think the universe has its own mysterious way to arrange how we met, because several years ago, both of us were at the same time, at the same day, in the same library in the Netherlands Architecture Institute. And I saw on one desk a palm tree. So I screamed, because I'm a tropical creature, I screamed, "Hey, palm tree." And the person who was using the archive was Obbe Norbruis. And we found out that we are actually neighbors in Amsterdam. And both of us work as an independent consultants in urban planning. So Obbe, after that, become a kind of my mentor, but we have also a lot of discussion, and I'm humble to be able to follow the journey that Obbe has taken to follow his passion, to write a book about the architect bureau Hulswit-Fermont-Cuypers. First, he published 2 books like this one, this first book, and then this is the second book. And then later, because he loves Indonesia and he really wants to share his knowledge and his books with the Indonesians, he did his best to translate his works into English, which today we are going to discuss. And I think soon the books in English will be also available in Indonesia. So it has been a learning journey for me to learn Obbe and also to follow his work. He's also inspirations for me as a younger colleagues to learn about perseverance, to follow the patients. So I hope that today we can have a fruitful discussions about shared heritage between Indonesia and the Netherlands. And it's amazing what the Architect Bureau has done, that a lot of their works become the landmarks in Indonesia now. So thank you very much, and I'm glad to meet you all online today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Hasti Tarekat, for the remarks. Also, we will have opening remark from Executive Director of PDA, Bu Nadia. Bu Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Umu. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for the participant from Indonesia, and good morning for the participant in the Netherlands. I'm very happy to meet you all in this online launching of the English edition of Cuypers book by Obbe. Thank you very much, Obbe, for your initiative to do the online launching with us. And I would like to say thank you for the Badan Warisan Sumatera, and also for Trisakti University that facilitate us to hold this heritage talk. And also I would like to say thank you to Fernanda to become a commentator for this public launching, and also Mas Arya to be a moderator. So please enjoy this session, and thank you very much for participating in this online launching. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Nadia, for the opening remark. So before we move on to our next agenda, allow me to read some rules we have to follow through. So the first one, please write your full name when entering the Zoom meeting room to make identification easier, especially for EIE members. For the Nilaikum, it should also be noted that for members of the EIE, CUM points are only obtained for participants who attend Zoom meeting. The second one, all discussion participants who have entered the Zoom room meeting are expected to set the microphone in mute during the discussion. Video can be displayed or not, it is optional. And for participants who do not mute the microphone, the host or moderator has the right to remind and or mute directly. Third one is, please do not use annotation tool during the discussion. Also, if the room has reached its maximum capacity, we also have streamed this discussion through our YouTube channel. So you can go and share the YouTube link to your friends as well. The floor is open for question after presentation, but audience can ask question through the chat room or YouTube comment section. And lastly, we will have a photo session after discussion. So it is advisable for you to turn on your camera. Okay, so that's the rules we have to follow. So in the next 2 hours for today's session, we'll feature the subject of the importance of historical landmarks in a city, presented by Obbe Norbruis. So allow me to read some short bio of him. Obbe Norbruis studied architecture and urbanism in Delft and is working in Netherlands. Past 10 years ago, he has been interested on Western architecture. Wait, there's actually a presentation for this. Allow me to share it first. Okay. Okay. Past 10 years ago, he has been interested on Western architecture, which were built in Indonesia before 1960. From 2011 onward, he has been doing research on the architects who work at Cuypers and Hulswit-Fermont Architectural Office. Both offices designed and built numerous projects between 1900 and 1927 in Dutch East Indies. After 1927, the office Hulswit-Fermont continued under the name Vermont-Cuypers, which lasted until 1957. This office again designed and built many buildings in Indonesia. And for you who want to keep contact or ask questions, you can email Obbe by his email attached below. Also, we have another special guest, and it is Pak Nanda. Pak Nanda Widiarta is a doctorate student at School of Art, Design and Architecture in UNSW, Sydney, University of New South Wales. He is also a lecturer at the Department of Architecture in University of Indonesia. He has written several books, generally with other authors. In 2016 to 2017, he became one of the curators in the architectural sector at the Creative Economy Agency. So Pak Nanda will deliver some commentary on the discussion on the topic as well. So that's it for the short bio. Our moderator for today's discussion would be Pak Arya Abita, a conservatory architect who's been dealing with many heritage buildings in Indonesia. So I will pass the baton to our moderator, Pak Arya, to lead today's heritage talk. The floor is yours, Pak Arya. Pak Arya, I believe you haven't unmuted.
Thank you, Umu. Sorry. Thank you. Selamat sore teman-teman di Indonesia dan selamat pagi teman-teman di Belanda. Terima kasih sudah join obrolan heritage. Okay, I think we already know Obbe and Nanda, the two speakers and commentators for this Obrolan Heritage. Obbe, we met in Jakarta in 2017. You remember?
Yes, I do. I do. Yeah, that was a very special meeting.
Take some pictures. That's fantastic. In 4 years, you already have 2 books in Netherlands as well as in English. So appreciate and thank you for the book. Okay, today we will talk about the importance of historical landmark in a city. That's a topic that Obbe will present. Actually, this presentation is based to what Obbe doing the last 10 years. So Umo already said that Obbe interest to Dutch architect who doing works in Indonesia, and especially to the company names Fermont-Cuypers, Hulswit-Fermont-Cuypers, which is very productive. If I'm not mistaken, it is one of the biggest architect bureau at that time, because it had about 200 buildings built. It's fantastic. We will see of some of the buildings in the presentation. And actually this presentation is regarded to the launching of the English book of the 2 books done by Obbe, Landmarks from Bygone Periods and Architectural from the Indonesian Past. Okay, I'm not taking any time. Obbe, time is yours, please.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. From a technical perspective, can I ensure that Obbe can now share his screen? Just want to confirm.
Okay.
Yep, I believe he has been admitted as co-host. Yep.
Okay, good.
You can see the screen now.
Oké, en ik ga het hiermee verplaatsen.
Daar leg je als iets.
Dat is goed. Hello, dear audience. Here I am with my presentation. My presentation is about old landmarks in the urban landscape, where I focus on the influence of history. And this presentation takes, well, more or less half an hour. So I hope you don't fall asleep. I'll keep it under control. And when I'm ready, I'm very interested to see and to hear your reaction. Okay, I especially want to understand how the spatial planning in and around us is changing. And let's see the next picture, this one. You see Jakarta around 1935. And as you know, and a lot of people will recognize it, this is what's called now the Kota Tua. In front of this picture, you see the what's now called the Museum Bank Indonesia, and it's quite interesting to know is that it's made in the 30s, and you see this Museum Bank building before the reconstruction from 1933. Both the old building here on the picture from 1913 and the later renovation were worked out by the architects you were already talking about. I would like to present the first title. All of you talked about it, but this is the title, Landmarks from a Bygone Era, about this architectural combination work between 1897 and 1927. And and maybe, I hope you can see it on your iPhone. They built in many, many Indonesian cities a building, or more than one. I'm not so sure if you can see it, but people from different cities can find the city on the map, I think, and maybe that makes it interesting to you. Here is the second book, a later period, between 1927 and 1957, they built about 100 buildings. And here you see on the map all the cities they were working in. At last, and Hasti told us about it, you can buy these books in Indonesia indeed, periplus.com and Tokopedia I've seen, and I believe it's for a reasonable price. Yeah? Any questions about this? Okay. This was the advertisement till now. Okay.
Okay, no problem.
Hey, my two books are not about this talk, about the great importance of historic landmarks in cities, because that would be too theoretical for a book, in my opinion. I wrote about buildings themselves, about the people who build them, and about the function they fulfilled. Most of those buildings still exist in Indonesia, and that's worth a compliment to Indonesia, that they still exist. Well, I'm not talking about landmarks as icons. This is the Eiffeltoren, you know it. We recognize this different type of landmarks. And these icons, these buildings are most autonomous, expressive, and they surrounded by a lot of space. I show a few familiar ones as a sort of warming up. Everyone will recognize this Eiffeltoren as a well-known symbol. The building does not need the city of Paris to be recognized. Yeah, you will recognize that tower even if you have never been there. And actually, the same for this building, the Opera House in Sydney. The Eiffeltoren is actually this Opera House is the Eiffeltoren of Sydney. It's built, as you know, probably in 1973. And even if you have never been to Sydney, you will recognize this building, not by its history, but by its remarkable and in the same time rather timeless architecture. By the way, I made this picture as a tribute to Mr. Biadi's UNSW Sydney degree. Well, and this is well known for you. Indonesia has its Monument Nasional. I wonder why this national monument of Indonesia is outside Indonesia less well known than the Eiffeltoren outside France or the Opera House outside Australia. Is that because Indonesians are too modest? That is my question. Let's talk about it later on. From the viewpoint of the Monument Nasional, you can see the Istiqlal Mosque in the distance. That mosque is an important landmark in Jakarta. Behind it, you see, much smaller, the cathedral from 1901. Because of its size, the mosque stands out much more in the city than the cathedral. You can see that the cathedral has difficulty accepting that position. With two illuminated spires, the building attracts all the attraction in the evening. Buildings like this, ladies and gentlemen, are visual eye catchers. For many people, they are points of orientation that let them know where they are. Orienting on landmarks is part of people's orientation system, even though they now have handy navigation systems. All buildings can tell stories, just like all people. These stories that an old building tells belong to the city in which it is located. And if you live in that city, these stories are yours. We are here in Malang. First, you have to recognize the building by its shape. The shape must unlike other buildings. Secondly, you need to know the story of the building. History. If that story is a special history, you can speak of an historic building. Here on the pictures, you see how the church is now on the left picture. Besides of that, you see Mr. Hulswit. He built the church with bamboo and so on in 1905. This belongs to its story as well. In 1906, the church was ready, but as you see, without the towers, there was no money for it. In 1928, they built the 2 towers, and that is altogether this church in Malang. This is the history of a church, and this is the history of Malang as well. By recognizing the building and the story of buildings, an historic building becomes a landmark, a beacon in a modern city. especially in cities that are constantly changing, as for example, Jakarta. Rapid changes are making the future increasingly unpredictable. Experiments show that people are open to rapid changes as long as they also have fixed beacons, landmarks. We live in a world that is constantly changing with an enormous impact in the urban landscape. Cities grow, transform, rearrange, and adapt. What are the beacons in such rapidly changing cities? I think indeed that are the historic buildings. The towers of a mosque or the church are important landmarks as long as they are not oppressed by buildings that are much higher, as seen here in New York. This is St. Patrick's Cathedral from 1878. The church was built in a neo-Gothic style, just like the cathedral in Jakarta. Many European architectural historians during that time were rather negative about the Gothic revival in the late 19th century and in the 20th century. Actually, they were against any neo-style. The designer and the builder of the cathedral in Jakarta thought otherwise. I wrote about both and about the church in the book Landmarks by a Bygone Era. The church was designed by a priest, by the way, and built by Mr. Hulswit. Okay. Probably the church in Jakarta is not as impressive as this neo-Gothic cathedral in Washington, D.C. in the United States. But it took 80 years longer for this church was completed. The construction time of the cathedral in Jakarta was only 4 years. So this is 84 years. You can imagine. Then is there, of course, a difference. And let's be honestly spoken, that the cathedral in Jakarta, built between 1907 and 1901, there was less construction tools than in Washington, and actually it was a great achievement. Despite criticism, around 1900, ladies and gentlemen, many buildings were built all over the world in a neo-architectural style. These buildings were all built by the colonial ruler between 1900 and 1930. All those buildings are remarkable landmarks now. Here we see, for example, the National Library, Melbourne, from 1913. The Victoria Building in Singapore from 1909. The Post Office in Singapore from around 1900. The Town Hall of Saigon from 1908. The Post Office of Manila from 1926. And the Melbourne Railway Station from 1910. And 12 more or less similar buildings were built in Indonesia by the architects I describe in my book. On the right, 2 examples, Bandung and Makassar. I will come back to this. Nowadays, you see in all the cities that the people are proud of these historic landmarks, even in the night. This type of buildings are much more interesting in the midst of all those high-rise buildings in the simple modern forms. Are you still there? Yeah. And here's Bandung. Bandung and the building in the spots as well. It is from 1918. In 1907, Eduard Cuypers, the person right on the picture, was commissioned to design and build more than 15 bank buildings spread across the Indonesian archipelago in cities as Banda Aceh, Medan, Padang, Palembang, Manado, Makassar, Jakarta, Batavia, Bandung, Cirebon, Yogyakarta, Surakarta, Semarang, Surabaya, and Malang. He was commissioned by the Javase Bank, which has been called Bank Indonesia since 1953. And ladies and gentlemen, that was an incredibly complicated task. Cuypers was working from Amsterdam. His colleagues Hulswit and Fermont were working from Jakarta. The construction had to be shipped from Amsterdam by ship. That took a month. And Hulswit took care of the logistics in the archipelago. That was a lot of work. Their story is my opinion, part of the history of all those historic landmarks. Edward Cuypers deliberately designed all those buildings in this neo-architectural style. Here we see the main buildings of Medan, Bandung, Surabaya, Jakarta. And he built them in a sort of business style, a neo-business style for all these business cities. And people know now in Indonesia that people are proud upon them too, even in the night. Here you see them all in the night in 2015. Here you see the Javase banken in Surakarta, Cirebon, Yogyakarta, and Banda Aceh. This was the neoclassical style, a sort of royal style. That was the favorite for Cuypers in, let's say, the royal cities, as Surakarta, Cirebon, Yogyakarta, and Banda Aceh. They are a little bit different from the others. And we know it all. In the evening, the Indonesians are proud upon it. These are modern landmarks in a changing city. People are using it to make a picture of it. I have been in Medan. I found this picture on the internet. I mean, that is exactly the meaning of a landmark like this building in Medan. In Indonesia, the history of many historic buildings was first written by the Dutch, as we know, and later by the Indonesians. And that makes those buildings, in my opinion, more interesting, because both stories, the Dutch one and the Indonesian one, do not contradict each other, they complement each other. The significance of a landmark can be experienced very strongly within a certain culture, and can even be part of a shared identity. The American researcher Kevin Lynch drew this conclusion as early as 1960 in his famous study, The Image of the City. In it, he investigated how people find their way in cities, how he discovered that people find their way in cities thanks to the landmarks, easily recognizable streets and neighborhoods or districts also help with the orientation. You can also consider historic streets and historic districts as landmark. Now, you do recognize the Braga Street in Bandung, or the Kota Tua, or the Kota Lama. Kevin Lynch concluded that people form mental maps of parts of the city with which they have many associations and whose image is determined by memories and individual meanings. For other parts of the city, the person may have a much less detailed mental map because he or she has fewer associations with it. How we see reality therefore varies considerably between people. Kevin Lynch thought that the image of the city is colored by the observer. When parts of the city evoke associations or memories in many people, they are part of the shared identity. All those we have our navigation systems now. Hey, a well-known building for most of you. Well, here you see the shared identity of the Dutch is different from the Indonesians. For the Dutch, this was a trading building on Stadhuisplein in Batavia, when it was built in 1921 by the architects. For Indonesians, it is Gedung Yazindo now, Taman Fathahillah in Jakarta. the same building in two completely different movies. For the Indonesian, this building almost disappeared due to decay and fire. It rose from the ashes. I think both Indonesians and Dutch like it, a landmark in downtown Jakarta. And on the right, you see the first passengers elevator in Jakarta from 1920. The first one. Sorry, but it doesn't work anymore. The shared identity of Indonesians is certainly different from the Dutch in terms of the landmarks that played a role in the Indonesian struggle for independence. Here a picture of the front building of the Majapahit Hotel in Surabaya. This is a landmark for Indonesians because of the flag incident in 1945. The Dutch associate this hotel with themselves because it was once called Oranje Hotel, named after their royal family. I do not describe this building in my books. It was designed by another architectural firm, but it is a wonderful history. I do describe this building and landmarks from a bygone era. This building, ladies and gentlemen, has a very striking tower, making it a remarkable landmark in Surabaya. For the Dutch, this building was for a trading company from 1915. It has lost that meaning now. Here you see it during that time as it was for a trading company. Linde Teves Stockvis. The tram, it was once. For Indonesians, this building became meaningful during the Battle of Surabaya in 1945. This was shown on a large sign placed in front of the building. Few people know there's a nice courtyard in this building. A courtyard like this, Indonesia only has one. 1950. This is what the courtyard looks like now. It is an oasis of calm in the busy city now, a beautiful historic location. And this old building is fortunate that its owner is a banking company, Bank Mandiri. The bank company is careful and assures that it remains an attractive historic landmark. Till now, I talked about old buildings in use. Last year, much has been done in Semarang to restore the Kata Lama. This was desperately needed because almost all historic landmarks were in bad shape. This large-scale restoration was a unique event for Indonesia, as it affected an entire district. But what will soon happen behind those beautiful renovated facades? Come apartments in those buildings, as in the old inner cities in Europe? Or do those buildings all remain empty? Will there be shops on the ground floor, or will they all remain located in the last local shopping mall? I fear the latter. A lot of people did their best, but as long as the traffic rushes through it and as long as the streets are regularly full of water, I fear that it will not be all right yet. I've got the answer, but let's talk about it. Because structural vacancy of a building means the end. Buildings must have a purpose. They cannot survive on their history alone. In many places in the world, the big brands, the big commercial companies using old attractive buildings, their innovative identity and the identity of the old building will form a unity. That happens here in Singapore. Yeah, you know it probably, with a large hotel chain in the old post office. Major global brands are using landmarks in cities such as Paris, London, and Amsterdam. These last brands are often found in indeed old buildings. On the left, you will see a building in Amsterdam. It's the same age as the building on the right side in Jakarta. The Apple Store is located on the ground floor in Amsterdam and derives part of its identity from the Stuyking building. The former Carter Bank has now been renovated, but is empty, and vacancy is disastrous for a historic landmark. Why is the Jakarta Apple Store not in there? I don't know. Why are the Apple stores in Indonesia always in the newest shopping mall? So they always have to move to the very newest one. Yes, I know, the outside temperature is more pleasant in Europe than in Indonesia, but nevertheless. In the former Carton Bank in the Kota Tua, Apple can link their high tech to this beautiful stained glass window that in the building is from the left to the right, tobacco, rice, tea, sugar, rubber. Why not an iPhone? I would not have said too much firmly if Jakarta Kota Tua had looked the way it did in 2010. Desolate, run down, and therefore completely uninteresting to Indonesians and tourists. But since car traffic has been diverted along Fatahillah Square and its surroundings, and since many historic buildings have been refurnished and the area has become pleasant for pedestrians, the square is structurally attractive for people. All those people come there because the square is distinctive thanks to the historic landmarks. Here on the right side, fortunately, there are interpreters who open a restaurant in an old building, such as the one on the right side designed by Hulswit-Fermont-Cuypers. I describe it in my book. And the Kota Tua of Jakarta has a lot of buildings designed by the architects I wrote about. All landmarks in the historic district. Read the book and you know the history. At last, I want to end this talk with a modern building from 1938, which is why it is less noticeable in a modern city like Jakarta. It doesn't look good either, and I fear it will soon be demolished, like most of the other buildings on Harmony Square. The chance that a building will be demolished increases as less is known about it. I wrote down the history of this building in my second book. This is what the building looked like in 1938. A travel agency called Nitour has established its in it. It was a beautiful building for people who like modern architecture. But this building becomes even more of a landmark by its shape or architecture. This history witnessed Mohammed Tamrin's funeral. This is the same building during this funeral procession. Thinking about Tamrin and what he meant for Indonesia, this building takes on a different meaning. Landmarks like this are more than buildings, ladies and gentlemen. They are, that's my opinion, part of the Indonesian history. I want to end with an Indonesian specialty. The question was here, in these 4 cases, what to do with a bank building if it has become too small for a growing organization. In many countries, including the Netherlands, the bank company is moving to another new building, leaving the old building empty. In Indonesia, a new office building is being built behind the old building, so that the old one can retain its representative function. That is sensible because it keeps the old building functioning as an historic landmark. We can learn a lot from each other. The Ministry of Human Development and Culture of Indonesia did the same. They became the owner of this property, the former passages building from 2 Dutch shipping companies. This is a picture from 1930. It's a ministry now. I wrote about this building in my second book. The building is one of the many landmarks that were built by Fermont-Cuypers around Jalan Medan Merdeka. At last. I will end with 2 beautiful photos of the Museum Bank Indonesia. Well known. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Obbe. Very nice presentation. Kita barusan dibawa Obbe ke masa lalu, mengingatkan kita begitu banyak kekayaan yang kita miliki dari masa lalu, dan kita juga melihat bagaimana the Dutch architects Fermont-Cuypers and Hulswit mendemonstrasikan royal style yang tropicals. Melengkapi presentasi hari ini, saya kira saya mempersilahkan Mas Nanda untuk memberikan komen pada presentasinya Obbe dan memperkaya diskusi kita nanti. Mas Nanda?
Baik, terima kasih Mbak Arya. Saya akan coba share screen dulu.
Siap, silakan Mas.
Zet de presentatie neer. Hij moet weg, Peter, en hij gaat niet weg.
Dia-voorstelling beëindigen.
Ja, dat kan ik doen. Ik weet niet of het dan lukt. Ben ik nu weg?
Ya, pertanyaan saya kira sebaiknya dititipkan di chat dulu supaya kita nanti bisa sama-sama membahas.
Nu is hij geloof ik weg, hè? Ja.
Oké.
Oké.
Ik kan hier niet in. Daar moet ik dan zijn.
Ya, apa sudah terlihat?
Sudah. Moderator, teman-teman boleh silent yang lain.
Oke.
Umu, silakan di silent yang lainnya supaya Mas Nanda bisa memulai. Silakan Mas Nanda.
Terima kasih kepada Pak Moderator. I think I'll start to talk in English. As I noticed, there are a number of non-Indonesians among the audience. So why don't I speak English then?
Okay, please do.
So I've been asked to provide a response on Obbe Norbruis' presentation, which is a very, very fine presentation. And I think Obbe is right, that landmark really, really means something. The fact is that when I arrived in Sydney, one of the first things I did was to look at the map to find not only the location of the Sydney Opera House, but also how to get there. That's very important for me, right? So thanks, Obbe, for the Opera House. By the way, La Traviata is being staged at the Opera House this month. So let me try to change the slide. So I think the main point that Obbe proposed in his presentation is the importance of historical landmarks in a city, for any city. As I said earlier, that the Sydney Opera House was something that was in my mind when I just arrived. I just landed on Sydney when I just arrived there. And not only that, why do you think Sukarno actually commissioned the construction of the National Monument in Jakarta? Well, okay, this is not based on a written record. It is based on the memory of my late grandfather. So between 1963 to 65, anytime Sukarno landed on the Air Force Base in Malang, Sukarno's safety was the responsibility of my grandfather. So there were, between those years, my grandfather met Sukarno many times, actually. So one day he asked Sukarno, why do you have to build that national monument, sir? Do we really need it? And then Soekarno said to my grandfather, I'll tell you why, but please don't tell anybody about it. Okay, fine, what is it? Anytime I'm in Jakarta, I get lost. That's what Soekarno said. I need a landmark. I need to have a landmark as a point of reference so that I can understand where I am anytime I'm in Jakarta. That's what Soekarno actually said to my grandfather. So it is. So the importance of a landmark is as a reference for our presence, a reference of our position in a city. So yeah, even though we have today GPS-based applications such as Waze and other applications, but still landmark matters, because landmark is not just about a point of reference for our position in a certain place, but a landmark is also a representation of collective memory. I think in his presentation, Obbe touched upon this issue. For instance, when he showed the Oranye Hotel, or the Hotel Majapahit in Surabaya, in which we saw in Obbe's presentation two kind of collective memories regarding the hotel. The Dutch would have a different memory pertaining to the hotel, different from what the Indonesians have, because of the 1945 thing. This was something that was discussed by Aldo Rossi in 1966 in his book, of course, in a very, very important book. And later on in 1979 to 1980, Rossi actually tested his theory, according to which the form of a landmark of a city represents the collective or communal memory of the city's inhabitants. So Rossi tested his theory in 1979 to 80 through his project in Venice, Il Teatro del Mondo, which is, like a theater on the sea kind of thing. He didn't copy pasted the lost landmark. The landmark was already lost by 1970s, no longer there. But he realized that people in Venice in 1970s still talk about, my great-grandparents talk about a theater that was on the sea, like a ship and all that. So he didn't recreate it in copy-paste kind of manner, but he recreated something similar to it, to brought up the collective memory of the Venetians. Now, there is one interesting point actually brought up by Obbe in his presentation, which is a question. Why do some people, such as in Indonesia, not just in Indonesia actually, but let's say in Indonesia, have such an ambiguous attitude toward their own historical landmark? Like Obbe asked, why don't the Apple Store in Jakarta is located on that particular historical building, right? So I would like to dwell in this matter. I may be wrong. This is a hypothesis, but let me just propose it for the sake of discussion. Now, some people may say, especially when we talk about colonial era historical landmark in Indonesia, some people may say, well, Indonesians have traumatic experience of colonialism, but is it really a factor? I don't think so. I don't think so. Why? Okay. Look at the Roman Catholic Church in Malang, which Obbe showed earlier in his presentation. I actually know that that church. That church was very important for my grandparents. Why? Well, first, they used to go to Sunday Mass there. And second, it is an very important landmark in Malang. So it's a point of reference for my grandparents anytime they're at home in Malang. You see, so and you know what? my grandparents who really appreciated that church as a historical landmark. My grandparents were not pro-colonial government or something. In fact, my grandparents who had been guerrilla fighters during the war for independence. So the explanation that the traumatic experience of colonialism is the factor may not be plausible, because actually many people who were pro-independence, etc., and so forth, still like the landmarks, still had, this rather emotional attachment to those historical landmarks, even though they're from the colonial era. So it's not plausible to say, oh, traumatic experience of colonialism, etc., and so forth. Yeah. Even if it's very traumatic, the colonialism is very traumatic. I mean, actually, my grandfather had a very particularly traumatic experience in late 1930s in relation to colonialism. Still, he appreciated a lot of historical landmarks from colonial era. He still liked them, like the landmarks. So the reason why people in countries such as Indonesia have such an ambiguous attitude toward their own historical landmarks, to be honest, I do not have the definitive answer right now. But I would like to propose my hypothesis, which is, and I'm talking about historical landmarks both from the colonial era and post-independence periods, because in the case of national monument, which was brought about by Obbe in his presentation, I think it shows as well a kind of the same ambiguous, if at least similar ambiguous attitude toward the national monument as a landmark. And it is a post-independence landmark. So probably this ambiguous attitude is an effect of the concept of development. Now, don't get me wrong here. When I'm saying development here, I'm not talking about development in a very general sense. Of course, I agree that economy has to be developed. Of course, I agree that society has to be developed, etc., and so forth. But when I say development here, what I mean is one particular understanding about development, which has to do with a concept, economic concept, known as developmentalism. More on that later. So, what is this? What is this particular sense of development which I'm talking about? As you all know, of course, it's just a refreshment of memory. The Industrial Revolution in the 19th century prompted the rise of concepts such as progress and modernity during the 19th century, mostly in the West. However, in the transition period between the 19th century to 20th century, to early 20th century, the concepts of progress and modernity became important not only in the West, but also in other parts of the world, especially in the colonial parts, as well as the parts where, especially after the First World War, as you know, there were places such as Iraq and Egypt that became protectorates of some Western countries. So these concepts of progress and modernity became important globally in the early part of the 20th century. Now, later on, after 1945, these concepts of progress and modernity, although still in use, transform into another concept, which is development. Development as I'm talking about it now. Development as in developmentalism, which is a paradigm on how economy has to be further, well, I'm sorry to say, developed. And this paradigm of developmentalism, as I believe you know, has been embraced by institutions such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Funds, etc., and so forth. And it is the same paradigm that is still used by the Indonesian government today, by the way, and the governments of many other countries, such as Brazil, for instance. So So when I say development, this is the particular meaning of development. So not development in general sense. So please bear with me on this. Now, as the concept of development is tied to progress and modernity, as dictated by the common, or I would say the hegemonic economic system, we know its logic, demand for something new, of course. That's the reason why Starbucks outlet in Indonesia tend to use malls or any building that are not historical landmarks, such as this one. People always say, oh, it's Starbucks at the Sarinah Tamrin. Sarinah Tamrin is, of course, a historical landmark, which is, well, okay, not in a good situation, condition now. But actually, this branch of Starbucks Coffee is located at the Skyline building next to Sarinah, not on the landmark itself. Now, it seems to me that the only sin, if I can say that, of course not sin, but the only reason why historical landmarks in places such as Indonesia is that they are perceived as lacking of newness. That's a problem, I think. Probably this is the reason. Therefore, they are perceived, perhaps subconsciously, as not representing development. So this is the problem. This is probably the reason why we have such an ambiguous attitude toward historical landmarks, because we have this perceived idea that these historical landmarks are nice and all beautiful, but they lack of newness, and that's a problem. That is a problem we have. I'm not saying that, well, because of this particular paradigm of developmentalism, then we have to forget historical landmarks. Of course not. I'm not saying that, of course. But I think we need to identify the problem so that we can talk about how to solve it, right? So how come such perception of historical landmark came about in places like Indonesia? Okay, let's consult the history then. As you all know, as you all remember, after 1945, the concept of development became what we know now, and at the same time, the Cold War began. So there was an attempt by the Western Bloc to contain Soviet influence through development. Initially, it was mediated by the Marshall Plan in Europe. Now, as the Marshall Plan worked very well, by 1949, even Yugoslavia asked for Marshall Plan in 1949. So Washington in late 1940s came up with the Truman Doctrine. So according to this doctrine, so basically it's Marshall Plan beyond Europe, so to speak. Well, it's not Marshall Plan, but American aid beyond Europe. So according to this doctrine, development had to be spread globally, not just in Europe, not just in Western Europe, but globally, in order to contain Soviet influence. And this also applied to Indonesia, by the way. I've seen some reports submitted to the U.S. Congress in 1953 or something, if I don't know if I can recall it well, talking about, is it necessary to give foreign aid to Indonesia? The answer is yes, because of this, and that. So basically, to contain the Soviet influence. So the idea of creating such development globally was the factor behind foreign financial and technical aid Indonesia received throughout the Cold War era. Well, in the case of Indonesia, it started in 1950 and up to 1989, of course, when the Cold War ended. Now, during Sukarno era, Sukarno preferred and in fact practiced the Yugoslav model of getting foreign aid, that is, by getting the aid from both Western and Eastern blocs. Well, not only Yugoslavia and Indonesia were not the only ones who did it. Ethiopia and India also did the same thing during the same time. Now, up to early 1960, most foreign aid in Indonesia, up to 1960, most foreign aid Indonesia received actually came from the Western Bloc, not from the Eastern Bloc. In fact, until 1962, the United States was still the largest donor for Indonesia. Throughout the 50s, up until 1962, the US was the largest donor for Indonesia. So, yes, after 62, the Soviet Union was a very large donor for Indonesia, giving a lot of foreign aid. However, remember that most foreign aid from the Soviet Union ended up in what? Military equipments and big projects for industrialization, such as the steel plant in Cilegon, which will be the Krakatau Steel. But even that didn't finish. This is different from foreign aid from the United States. Look, much of the foreign aid Indonesia received in the education sector during 1950 to mid 60s actually came from American sources. So along with this foreign aid, ideas also came through education, of course. So the American sources for education sector were mainly from Ford Foundation and the ICA, which is the predecessor of the USAID. USAID is basically the ICA being changed by Kennedy administration into, USAID. After the coup in 1965, which I will not blame the usual suspect, because the coup was aimed at replacing Sukarno, and it had to do with the Cold War itself. Indonesian economy was turned into the developmentalist leaning mode even further. I'm not saying that before 1965, there was no leaning toward developmentalist leaning mode in Indonesian economic development. There was. If you look at the Sumitra Plan in 1951, you can see it actually. However, it went even further after the coup in 1965. Well, that's the point of the coup anyway. This was conceived and directed since 1967 by some economists trained in the US using, of course, American scholarship. We call them the Berkeley Mafia. So I already mentioned what happened in 1950. Actually, developmentalism had been there in Indonesian economic development as well. So because of this history, from 1950s up to today, developmentalism is still the paradigm of Indonesian economic program. So it is not surprising that development in developmentalism kind of sense has been in our mind, Indonesian mind up to today. It is actually kind of difficult. If you want to try, which I don't really recommend, let's talk about with people at Bapenas and talk about it. They still have this kind of mindset, of course, and we cannot blame them for that. So the effect is that the newness, as development in such sense is still in our mind, the effect is newness is in demand. Remember that if image is something of a commodity, then the image that is very well sold in Indonesia will be the image of being new, really, newness. Now, historical thing is to be remembered only. It's to be seen as something nostalgic, beautiful, etc. and so forth, but only that, unfortunately, instead of to be reused. This seems to be the situation these days. Of course, I'm not saying that I'm pessimistic and all that. I don't know. No, what I'm trying to do is try to identify a factor why we have this ambiguous attitude toward our own historical landmarks. Because historical landmarks, it doesn't matter whether it came from pre-colonial era, whether it came from the colonial era or a post-independence era. they are important, of course, for our cities. For sure, they are very important. It's not just about nostalgia, because nostalgia can be dangerous sometimes. I don't want to talk about some papers in social sciences in the last 10 years about nostalgia. It's not about politics, really. But it's historical landmarks is about our point of reference of our being there, our presence, our existence as human beings. It's about our memory. It's about our emotional attachment, of course. Like my grandparents, emotional attachment with the Catholic Church in Malang, which Obbe presented, for instance. It is an essential thing. Historical landmark is an essential thing indeed for our quality of being human, actually, I think. However, unfortunately, the hegemonic economic system created a situation in which in places like Indonesia, we have this rather, I would say, ambiguous attitude toward historical landmarks. So, okay, I may be wrong, of course, but I think this is time to discuss. Thank you. I will stop share.
Thank you, Mas Nanda. You already enriched the perspective of landmark that Obbe presented. Okay, before we go to discussion, I'd like to ask Obbe, what is your thought after you got a comment from Nanda about your presentation? Maybe you have any words to say, Obbe? Sorry, you're still mute. Would you please? Obbe, you're still in mute mode. Obbe?
Ja, nu?
Yeah, okay.
Hello.
Any comment or thought about what Nanda perspective to the perspective of the landmark that you talk about?
Yeah. Well, my reaction is that actually is completely right. That there's more under the sun than buildings and conservation and so on. It has a lot to do with the society and politics and history and so on. So I agree that a lot what he said is a sort of declaration for the situation in Indonesia now. Can you understand me? Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I agree. There's much more under the sun. On the other hand, and that's why I'm an urban planner. Cities are going on. Cities are the decor of a theater.
Mm.
And that's why I'm very positive about what happened in the Kota Tua, because all this renewal, the completely new setting, the people all together and in the evening, that is something which has nothing to do, in my opinion, with politics. It is a choice. Mm-hmm. And you helped Aria a lot to do it and to make it better and so on. So I think it is, politics or not, it is important that people go for it and say, okay. And I think that in Surabaya they can learn a lot from Jakarta. And at last, my question is still, what is the reason that sometimes things happen in cities as here in Europe, which not happened in Indonesia? What can we learn from each other? That is maybe something, and that I missed a little bit in the explanation of the commentator. Mm-hmm. Maybe he can help us with it. Okay? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll try. I don't know much about Western Europe because, and it is wrong, I think, to generalize Western Europe because we know that Scandinavian countries, for instance, have their own economic system, which is rather, you know, we can call it socialist, perhaps. Welfare state kind of thing in Denmark, for instance. So I don't know if that affected the way to use historical landmarks. You know, like you showed that an old building in the Netherlands being used by the Apple company, for instance, which is excellent, I think. So I kind of hope that buildings in Kota Tua, for instance, can be used for the same thing as well. You know, Apple or whatever. Because they have the potentialities for that, but no, it's not happening for now. I don't mean to be pessimistic, of course. And yes, I have to admit that my response is kind of lean toward political and economical things because that's actually my specialty. In terms of architectural history and its relation on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did I make it clear, or I don't know?
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Any others friends who want to give a comment or question to Nanda or to Obbe? Maybe Pak Suryono Herlambang. I saw Pak Suryono Herlambang are here. I thought Pak Suryono is one of the lecturers who specialize in conservation as well and know about and study about the landmark as well. Pak Suryono? May I ask Pak Suryono to enrich? Oh, okay, there's another Pak Suryono. Any others? Or maybe Pak Punto? Pak Punto, since your subject is very related to what Obbe and Nanda said, Nanda explained. Okay. Pak Punto is not yet. Okay. I saw here some question in chat. One is from Ibu Tamalia Alishabana. Ibu Tamalia, maybe it's your time to dialogue us to Pak Obbe or to Nanda. Ibu Tamalia.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, good. So I was the director of the Gedung Arsip Nasional. That's clear in 1960. So I had many different people coming and saying, some of them said, why are we colonial building? It's a Dutch. Then I had other people coming and saying, I don't like this building, it's haunted. All old buildings are haunted. Then I also had people saying, I don't like old, I want something new, you know, something that's with the times, which I think is what Pa Muhammad Nanda was saying. Yeah, so I think it's a combination of reasons. But I think also that feeling about it's colonial, it's Dutch, is becoming somewhat less. Now, when I was the director, I would say to people who would say, it's a colonial, it's a Dutch building. And I would say, yes, but who built it? And they would say the Dutch. I said, no, but who put the bricks? It was our sweat. It was our blood. We built it. And who won? We won to have independence. So why not enjoy it? Our building. So, you know, different perspective. And, you know, when school children would always say, okay, who does it? The Dutch embassy, the Chinese embassy, lots of answers. No, it belongs to you. Who here is not an Indonesian citizen? If you are an Indonesian citizen, it belongs to the government of Indonesia, and therefore it belongs to the people of Indonesia, therefore it belongs to you. And I think, because I took over the building in 1998, and now it's 2021, I think Jakarta has changed. There's been a change of opinion of how people look at old buildings. I think a lot of Jakartans have become very fond of old buildings. If you wanted now to tear down Gedung Asip, I think there will be a lot of protest.
Okay.
And of course, the thing about, that all old buildings are haunted. This is why when we took over the building, sorry, am I talking too long? Should I stop?
Yeah, I think we got your comment already, and maybe.
Can I just add one quick thing?
Okay,
what
please.
Pak Muhammad Nanda is talking about, that feeling of developmental, of wanting something new, of wanting also a new identity, of wanting to be a player in the modern world. I think we can see that reflected in the Genki architecture that came up in the 1950s, right after independence. Okay, sorry for going on too long.
No problem. Okay, Mas Nanda, maybe you can answer or comment to what Ibu Tamalia said.
Yes. Well, I don't know. I don't know about the. I heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, this old building is older and all that." Although I've never seen any. But yeah, I think it is interesting that Ibu Tamalia mentioned about the Genki style, which is, by the way, although it tends to be associated with post-independence kind of thing, but in reality, the original Genki houses in Kebayoran Baru were designed by a Dutch architecture office, Job and Spray, which is Jakarta-based as well at the time, by the way. So it's not really to claim that it's Indonesian design kind of style. Well, I would disagree with that because of that fact. And second, I do agree that Genki style, in fact, the whole Kebayoran Baru area is associated with this, the thing that you mentioned, our independence and our longing for something modern and development, etc., progress. In fact, if you remember the teenage movie in 1950s, Tiga Darah, which is set in Kebayoran Baru a lot, that actually represent that kind of optimism. However, what we tend to forget is that for a certain social class, which is the lower social class, Kebayoran Baru is another story. And I'm talking about Indonesians as well. And this is represented by a short story by Pramudia Anantatur, Cerita dari Jakarta, in which a lot of native Betawi people living in Kebayoran area had to be evicted in order for the sake of this Kebayoran Baru project. And a lot of these people were, well, displaced, of course, with, all these sad stories and all that. So I think memories can also be problematic here, but that's another thing. So it can be a discussion in itself anyway. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Nanda. Obbe, any comment to Ibu Tamalia question?
No, you can hear me, eh?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, my comment is that what I hear was that a lot of people like modern things more than old things. That is right. You see it here in Europe as well. I mean, people buy new stuff for the interior, and all these old chests from family and so on are less important. But it is my opinion, most beautiful if you have a mixture between old and new. And that's exactly, in my opinion, what historical buildings have to do in a new city. The combination makes it more unique than just modern. That is one of my reactions upon the reflection of people who visit the Archives Nationaal. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe I'd like to give to Mr. Aulia Al-Gadri. Mr. Aulia, are you still there? You can directly ask or give you comment. Paulia. Okay, please.
Hello?
Hello?
Do you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, Mrs.
It's okay. Thank you for the insightful presentation addressing historic landmark existence and continuity. My question is, do you think the lack of experience for people in historical landmark has an effect in this continuity as recent development of historic? Yeah? Yeah?
Yep. Okay, Obbe?
I cannot give an easy answer on this question. Try to explain it a bit more, please, if you want.
My question is, do you think the lack of experience for people in historical landmark has an effect in discontinuity as the recent development of historic area Indonesia often more concerned toward visual aspect, while in recent study, sensory experience or intangible element actually influence awareness, engagement, and attraction for people towards historical area?
Okay. No, yeah, a lack of knowledge is, of course, a reason, but it is not the most important reason, because what about historical buildings? Most people see that they are different from others. And indeed, I wrote my books to tell the people more about the buildings. I did find a lot of information in Dutch archives, not in Indonesian archives. So you have to know the history, and then as soon as you know it, in my opinion, inclusive to people who live there and what they did, that makes a building more attractive. And so that is maybe what you mean, a lack of. On the other hand, and that's maybe a very important point as well, as soon as you know the building is attractive and good, as soon as you got money to restore it, then the final moment comes, who wants to use it? I mean, that is, in my opinion, for Indonesia, a very important question as well.
Thank you.
Who will be the new owner? Yeah? The user.
Okay.
Abita, you know, Mr. Abita, you know, it's this question was to Dun Jazindo. Yes. Is it still empty now, or is it in use?
Unfortunately, it's still empty because I don't know.
Yeah, but that is a pity. I mean, what is the reason? Do you have any idea? What is the reason?
I agree. Yep.
Maybe it's good to talk about it. Maybe we can be. I know we cannot solve it, but what is the reason that it is still empty?
Yeah, it's actually more to Jacindo problems. It's more to the company in itself problems, not because of the buildings or the government.
No. Okay. Yeah.
Ananda, maybe you have any opinion to what Aulia asked?
It's quite difficult for me to answer because the question is more about design. I understand that remember Aulia, I'm actually an architecture historian, so I'm not the right person for this. But I understand that your question is based on recent studies on architecture design, in which based on the an essay against the dictatorship of the eye, or something like that. But I think it's kind of difficult for us to actually revive the some other sensory elements in some historical places. Sometimes it's about hygiene as well, by the way. I remember I used to be in London, by the way. I used to stay in London for quite some time for my master degree. When I was in London, I visited several markets there, including historical markets. And I think the visual aspect is still there, retained, but when it comes to smell, for instance, it's gone, of course. But for an understandable reason. I mean, it has to do with hygiene, I think, right? I mean, you can't expect London to go back to the 15th century, or you know, it's very for our standard, it's kind of yucky. So we don't want that smell, by the way.
Okay.
So, this may be the things that we need to reconsider. Perhaps, well, after all, the shape, which is I'm sorry to say, Aulia, it's visual. The shape is the one that is important because it represents the collective memory.
Okay. I'd like to invite Pak Scott Marilis. Scott is still there?
Yes, Pak Arya, hi.
Is any thought about this discussion?
Yes, Pak Arya, thank you very much. And thank you, Pak Obbe and Pak Nanda, for leading this very interesting discussion and giving your excellent presentations. Thank you. I think with Kota Tua Jakarta, it can only be a historical district because it is relatively far from where modern Jakarta is developing, and the young people are not wanting to live in North Jakarta. They're living in South and West and East Jakarta. So I don't think we're going to see any Apple stores in Kota Tua, but even so, I think Kota Tua can still be a very interesting and successful historical district. And I'm very pleased if you go to Kota Tua on a Saturday or a Sunday now, it's actually very busy. It's very, very busy. And this is great. And a lot of the people there are quite young. So for them, it's something very interesting and new and exciting to see the way Kota Tua is a destination for them. Although at the moment it's just basically Fathahila, which is the center of it, and obviously Kali Besar should be developed as well. But I think a lot could be done, and I'm still positive there will be a good outcome for Kota Tua because so many young people want to go there, especially on the weekends. Cafe Batavia is a great restaurant, a great cafe, but of course it's a bit expensive for everybody. But we still have, I think was it Obbe's presentation, we have Jakarte, DJAKARTE, that little cafe on the right-hand side near the Museum Wayang, which is obviously more affordable. But Kali Besar really needs to be developed, and obviously it needs to be said too that Kota Tua Jakarta has fallen way behind Kota Lama in Semarang. The last 10 years have seen wonderful success in Kota Lama Semarang. So many buildings have been beautifully renovated, and it's become a lovely destination. And to answer Obbe's point about buildings being reused, well, you see like the Spiegel, for example. The Spiegel is an excellent cafe and excellent restaurant, nice bar, nice food, nice gelati. And you see that magnificent VOC 18th century building in Kota Lama Semarang, which is the Ikan Bakar Cianjur. So there is a case in Kota Lama Semarang of sustainable heritage. But of course, the Kota Lama Semarang is much closer to the center of Semarang than Kota Tua is to the center of Jakarta. And this is the big problem, I think. To get from, say, Jalan Pemuda in Semarang to Kota Lama is 5 or 10 minutes, because in Semarang traffic is not so bad.
Yeah.
But to get from let's say, Jalan Sudirman or Pondok Indah to Kota Tua in Jakarta, it might be an hour and a half. And so it's a different situation. But I suppose the risk for Semarang, Kota Lama Semarang, is flooding. Sadly, we've seen some very bad floods in Kota Lama Semarang this year. And on my last couple of trips to Semarang, which have been quite recent, like last year, you can really see how the northern part of Semarang really is either sinking or the sea levels are rising or both. And this is also having an impact quite severely this year on Kota Lama Semarang. But the success in Kota Lama Semarang has been great in terms of what they've been able to do. And I wish we had a Starbucks in Kota Tua. We have a KFC. We have a KFC in Kota Tua. If you go into the post office building,
in Station Kota.
Yes, exactly right, Pak Arya. There's a Starbucks in Station Kota, but there's a KFC in the Kantor Pos, in the post office, and that's very successful. Often I've not been able to get a seat there because it's totally full. So. But more of these iconic brands, if they were to be there, I think this would help attract more people. But I'm still encouraged by the young people going to Kota Tua in Jakarta, although I'm a bit discouraged that they only really focus on this Fatahila area, and there's not really much for them if they go to Kali Besar or elsewhere. But so thank you again, Obbe. Really appreciate your presentation today, and Pak Nanda, hope to meet you one day, and thank you very much for your presentations today.
Thanks, Scott. Obbe, any comment to what Scott said?
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for your wonderful words, and that gives us all inspiration. Yeah, somebody had to start, and actually the Kota Tua and the Kota Lama were starters, and I hope that all the cities do the same, although it will be complicated. And and I like it that so many young people are there. And that is really a very important point too. Thank you, Scott, for what you said.
Thank you, Obbe.
Okay, Nanda, any comment to what Scott said?
Oh well, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Marilis. I think you're right. It is kind of difficult to have business there at Kota Tua, Jakarta,
at the moment,
in comparison to Kota Tua Semarang, because of the distance between the city center, and as we all know, the city center was actually moved southward in 1962 during Sukarno administration, and that's the effect of it now. But yeah, I always like it anytime I go to Kota Tua in Jakarta to see these people, having fun there. So that give me some optimism as well. I agree.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Mr. Bas Johnson. Mr. Bas, are you still there? Bas Jensen or what? Hello? Mr. Bas? Because Bas is, okay. If there is no more in... Ibu Melati Rahmi Aziza. Ibu Mela, would you please directly ask your question?
Okay, based on the first presentation when Mr. Obbe showed the comparison between colonial building in Indonesia to other country. Now I wonder about the efforts to conserve colonial buildings in Indonesia as city landmarks that now happen. Does it for the sake of beautification only or for sustainability purpose? Because I still have this opinion whenever I went to a site of colonial building, it is just like an artifact. That is why many building is empty because maybe people tend to see it as an artifact, but not seeking for other purpose, that is for sustainability.
Okay.
And then it led to other question. Why the colonial building has high tax? Because it is related to many colonial houses were sold or ignored, and then the land was bought and the building was destroyed to build a brand-new building. Can we relate it with the trauma of our colonialization? But the term trauma wasn't come from ordinary people, but could be part of political history maybe, because the one who make the regulation came from our government. So
Related to
that
tax.
is my question.
Okay. Maybe Pak Obbe, any? Pak Obbe?
Yeah, hello.
You can hear the question and give any answer to the Melati question.
I'm sorry, I can't. That is. It was for me rather new to hear that.
Okay.
So maybe you can explain it a bit more for me, then I try to find the good answer.
Ibu Melati, can you explain?
It is. Let me say. I understand that last years a lot of things are happened. Many old buildings are destroyed or whatever because they were not so very important for the Indonesians, and the Dutch were gone. And nowadays the situation is a little bit different, and it depends. That's true. Politics, government, they had to take a decision about that. But maybe you can be a bit more specific about the question.
So there is a house in Bandar Lampung. It is, I forgot about the name, but it is also included as a colonial building, but then it was in controversy because the land already bought by a businessman, and then maybe this building will be destroyed.
Okay. Obbe, maybe the question is because of most of the old building is located in a prime area right now, which is the land price is becoming higher than others. So the value of the building itself is become less and less because of people thinking about the land value. And on the other hand, the tax is they give the same tax to the old building as new building in the area.
I see. Okay. That is quite. I didn't know that, but it is good to hear that. By the way, maybe it's a good moment now to tell you that I'm writing now a book about more than 120 architects who were working in Indonesia before the independence. Job and Sprey belonged to this group too. And what I did was to collect as many buildings as possible, and I try to find out if these buildings still exist in Indonesia. So within some months, I have this book, and I would like to offer it you, Arya Bita, and of course PDA, because this kind of a book like this can help people to try to be more careful with this heritage than now. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ananda, any opinions about the question?
Perhaps I won't be able to answer the whole thing, Bu Melati. I'm so sorry about it, because there are things that I don't know other than when it comes to economy that happens, and we have to do something about it. Government should decide on it. But you brought up the issue of possible trauma over colonialism. I'm not sure if that's plausible though.
Agree with.
Look. For instance, myself, I'm from a family. When we talk about my grandparents, both from paternal and maternal sides, they were heavily involved in the guerrilla warfare against the Dutch during the War of Independence. Therefore, they didn't like the colonialism. But it comes to colonial buildings, colonial landmarks, they like it. They do. They really do. So it's not about that, you know. It's not about trauma of colonialism. It's something else, you know. It's something else. One of my grandfathers had a very bad experience in the 1930s regarding a building. That's of course during colonial time, but it's not about the building itself that he had problem with. It's about something else, of course. You know. Well, still he liked colonial buildings. So it's I don't think perhaps the trauma of colonialism is, I don't know, just a made up reason. I don't know, but I don't think it's plausible. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Angelina Basuki, you can just give your question directly. Angie.
Hello.
Yep.
Hello, Parya, Obbe, and Pananda. So like what I was saying actually referring more like to the monumental landmark as a landmark structure, but I think since like our discussions are leading to more like landmark, district landmark like Kota Tua and Kota Lama. I think the interesting part for Kota Tua, it is true what Nanda said, that I think most Indonesians don't really have like negative emotion toward the buildings and the structures. However, after the independence, I noticed that Sukarno destroyed or demolished some monumental landmark like gates or statues, and then also tried to replace it. So I think back then most people didn't really think about the impact toward the collective memories, but now I think he quite succeed to create a like more nationalist landscape in Jakarta as capital, like erecting Monas in the middle of what we used to know as Koningsplein. And then also in the 70s, like the plaza in front of Stadhuis in Kota Tua Jakarta, now called as Plaza Fathahillah. Like we try to rename it and rephrase it into a new name that are more acceptable for the current residents, like the Indonesian.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then I also would like to say about the KFC on at the Kantor Pos. As myself part of the people who maintain the old buildings in Jakarta, I think it's part of finding our own identity, like our attempts to reclaim our city, that like the buildings that under our maintenance, we always try to curate them by only partnering up with other local business.
Okay.
So I don't know, like I would like to hear Pananda's respond about it.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Angie.
Yeah.
Okay, Obbe, you have any comment to what?
Yeah. Thank you, Angeline Bazuki. You did wonderful work in the Kota Tua. Thanks. Yeah, that's once. And well, secondly,
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
With the help of Pa Arya, of course.
Yeah, okay, you did it together, I know. Secondly, yeah, you talked about what happened after the independence with some historical buildings. They are destroyed now. That belongs to the history, and I can understand it. All these Dutch national symbols. What is now is that we have now buildings in Indonesia who are more universal, not specific Dutch. It's an Art Deco style you can find in Miami or whatever, and that makes it, in my opinion, more your buildings instead of a colonial one. And I hope the more buildings you find in this style and this architecture, the better it is. Even the bank buildings Mr. Cuypers built are more universal, more international than all the others. And I believe that was a good choice from this architect. And that's the reason why Indonesia can use them now in their own way. Yeah.
Okay. Ananda?
Just a little bit about what Angeline raised about Sukarno act of destroying some colonial era landmarks, monuments. Well, I think Sukarno was very well aware of the role of collective memory. That's why he did what he did.
Yeah.
He wanted to create a new one. If you look at the some philosophers, some historians, some thinkers such as Nietzsche and Gadamer talk about forgetting and remembering kind of thing, but I don't want to talk about it really. However, we need to remember that Sukarno also led quite a number of colonial era buildings to stand. Even his own palace, right? He didn't build a modernist presidential palace. I remember in 1961, in 1959 and 1961, Sukarno went to Brazil, and in 1959, President Kubitschek brought Sukarno to Brasilia, and Sukarno liked it very much. Very inspired, he went back to Indonesia in Jakarta in 1962. He gave a speech during the 435th anniversary of Jakarta. He mentioned Brasilia and Oscar Niemeyer by name. Think about it, how much he liked it. Yeah. Nevertheless, he did not destroy the colonial governor general palace, right? Instead of destroying that building and building a new modernist, instead of hiring Oscar Niemeyer to design the new one, Sukarno used that building. Think about it. So he didn't destroy everything. He had selection really. He selected what he thought not so important or something like that. That's my guess, based on the scale of the statues and the monuments he destroyed, But when it comes to the Governor General Palace itself, oops, I'm gonna use it. That's the fact. Yeah, that's from me.
Okay, thank you, Pananda. Maybe I will ask to Ibu Umu. Ibu Umu, it's about Maghrib times. Can we have to stop, or Ibu Umu or Ibu Nadia?
Yes. Can we ask Bu Nadia or Bu Ria instead regarding of this?
Or maybe we can give because I'm still seeing a lot of questions. Maybe I don't know. Nadia and Ria, you decided. Nadia, Ria, because it's about praying time, Maghrib. Or
Arya, is there any question more?
Still a
Or
lot. It's a lot. The discussion getting warmer and warmer.
I think we can have a pause for some times and then continue if Obbe and Nanda still available and wants to continue the discussion after this, and Trisakti still can facilitate us maybe for another 30 minutes or something, because actually we our plan is to finish at 6 o'clock.
Because
So
yeah, I saw a lot of discussion below. How about that? Are you agree? And Mbak Nanda, we have paused for 20 minutes. Maybe more than enough for 20 minutes, Ibu Nadia.
Okay.
Of course, we can still open and give some time to our Muslims family and friends to have service for the Maghrib pray. Pananda, are you agree with?
It's up to you, sir.
Probably I agree. If you agree, all agree. Then we can pause for 20 minutes and we can start again at 6:20 and maybe only up to maybe 30 minutes or at the most up to 7. Nadia?
Yes, if everybody is are agree, so yes.
Okay, so we break for 20 minutes, but I hope the discussion and still can going while we give some times for the our Muslim family and friends to have a Maghrib service. Thank you. Ibu Ria, you can just follow.
Nonton apa, Om Adit?
Mute tuh, Adit.
Iya. Kepada lagi kemana ya?
Adit ikut berduka cita ya, Dit.
Turut berduka cita ya.
Turut berduka cita ya.